So as we head closer to Christmas, we have reached what the church has called Gaudete Sunday. Gaudete coming from the Latin meaning to rejoice. And this Sunday is only one of two times during the year where we use rose vestments. And it symbolizes that we've reached the halfway point of Advent. And in reality, we're actually more than halfway, simply because of the shortened season of Advent as Christmas falls a little bit earlier this year. So speaking of all that, I guess I have to give the homily that every seminarian dreams of in their 7 years of seminary formation, the homily entitled The Christmas Mass Schedule, right? So, I've been prepping for this for 7 years, so we're ready to go, right? I'm prepped. So, to make a long story short, right, there's two obligations this week. The first being the fourth Sunday of Advent, and that Sunday is also Christmas Eve, right? And then the second obligation is Christmas. So we have two obligations, which means we have two masses to attend, right? So to meet the first obligation, which is the fourth Sunday of Advent, you can attend the Vigil Mass on the 23rd, which is at 5 p.m., or you can attend one of the two, and there's only two next week, Sunday morning Masses at 7:30 or 9:30. There is not an 11:30. And the reason there isn't one is because we have to get this place ready for Christmas, right? So we need the time to get everything decorated, everything ready to go. So one of those three you can go to meet that first obligation of the fourth Sunday of Advent. The second obligation is obviously Christmas, right? And those masses begin in the evening of the 24th, starting at 4, 6:30, and 10. Or you can attend on Christmas Day, and we only have one Mass on Christmas Day in English at 9:30 in the morning. So some people think we can just attend the vigil and we check the box for all three, right? That's not what happens, and that's the gift that Christmas is when they fall on Monday. That's the gift they just keep on giving every 7 years or so. So I know it's a little bit maybe annoying or frustrating, but that's how we do it. So you basically pick one Mass from each of those buckets, so to speak, and you are good to go. If you are still confused, there is a chart in the bulletin that we made. You can find that chart in there. And if you are still confused after that, please call the office and we will explain it as well as we can, right? So now I know how all those NFL referees feel when they explain overtime, right? But it worked out pretty good for us yesterday, so can't be complaining too much, right? So I guess you could say back to the real homily, right? And maybe some of you knew this or not, but the reason this Sunday is called Gaudete Sunday, right, is because that word is the first word of what we call an introit or an entrance antiphon. An introit or an entrance antiphon is the church's official song, you could say, for the entrance procession. And we don't often sing the actual one. You're probably more familiar with the communion antiphons that come, because we do those every Sunday during communion. We've grown accustomed to them. But the introits and the communion antiphons are difficult. They come from an official songbook. I don't know if you knew this or not, but the church actually has an official songbook. It's called the Graduale Romanum. And we don't use it very often because it's entirely in Latin, right? That makes it difficult to understand. And the music is incredibly difficult to sing. And so we have that book, and we have these introits, these entrance antiphons, and they're always connected to the Mass you're celebrating in some way. And so the words for this Sunday's introit are Gaudete in Domino semper iterum dico gaudete, Dominus enum prope est, which in English means rejoice in the Lord always. I say it again, rejoice. Indeed, the Lord is near. So Gaudete Sunday, along with its counterpart in Lent, Laetare Sunday, and both of those words mean the same thing. They're privileged days in the calendar. They're treated differently than the other days in Advent and in Lent. They're sort of meant to be the bright spots located in the middle of these seasons. The rest of Advent, liturgically, is meant to be, you could say, far less enthusiastic. And that's because Advent, like Lent, is a time of preparation and penance. It's preparing you to celebrate. And the church always celebrates her two highest solemnities, Easter and Christmas, with a season of penance and preparation. And the Mass is actually structured to kind of bring that out. The instructions, which you can find in that big book over there, talk about during Advent, the floral decoration, for example, of the altar should be moderated, suited to the character of the season, and not expressing prematurely the full joy of the Christmas season. It also states that with music, the organ, other musical instruments, they're meant to be used in a similar moderation that is consistent with the season and doesn't anticipate the full joy of Christmas. And basically what the church is trying to say in all of this is don't celebrate Christmas while you're still in Advent. And the instructions, believe it or not, are even more strict in Lent. It states that it is forbidden to have flowers during Lent, which trust me, brides hate hearing when they schedule their weddings in Lent, which is why we always tell them you should probably bump it to Easter so you can have flowers and decorations and other things. And that the playing of the organ and musical instruments is allowed only to support singing. So no preludes, no postludes. It kind of leaves you in silence. And the only exceptions to these rules during Advent and Lent are other solemnities and today, Gaudete Sunday. So what are we rejoicing for? What is the cause, you could say, of joy this season? Well, in the Bible, when we see the words joy and rejoicing, they're almost always centered around either the experience of deliverance or the anticipation of deliverance and salvation. And these moments of joy in the Bible are always expressed in celebration, and specifically when God's people gather together to celebrate. And we have example after example of this in the Old Testament. When Israel crosses the Red Sea, there's a joyful celebration. When David brings the ark into Jerusalem, when Solomon finishes building the temple, when they return from exile, all of those are marked with a community gathering and liturgical worship of rejoicing. So in our first reading, we get a sense of that. From Isaiah, the joy being expressed in that passage is what you could call one of those anticipatory moments. Because in Isaiah, Israel had just returned from exile in Babylon, but they still weren't completely free. They were still under the rule of the Persians, and then once the Persians were defeated, the Greeks, and then once the Greeks were defeated, the Romans. So it was over and over and over again, somebody, some external kingdom imposing themselves upon Israel. So they were awaiting that full restoration, which would come, they believed, with the Messiah, the anointed one that Isaiah is talking about. He's the one who's going to come and bring glad tidings to the poor, heal the brokenhearted, proclaim liberty to the captives. You could summarize all of that with one word: salvation, right? They're waiting for that. And so we read that reading and we rejoice this Sunday because we are gathered here in anticipation for that full joy that comes at Christmas. Because when Christmas comes, we get to celebrate the day that all of these prophecies in the Old Testament begin to be completed, begin to be fulfilled. He comes to do exactly that, to bring salvation, to a broken, scattered world. And so our introit reminds us, rejoice. That word in Latin is also in the form of an imperative, which means it's a command. The church is essentially obliging us this Sunday to rejoice. The second reading falls right into that. Paul says again, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, don't quench the Spirit. And so as we're preparing our final week for Christmas, let's make those words of our introit today our own as we're preparing, as we're waiting for Christmas to come. Rejoice in the Lord always. Rejoice. The Lord is near.